Hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Anarchist Experience. My name is Robert Kruger. I am your host, and my co-host Daniel Rothschild is here as well. We're going to be having a couple of guests with us. Victor Pross will be joining us shortly, and we also have Mitchell Connor
WeCheck.
WeCheck. Okay.
Pronounced exactly how it is not spelled.
Yeah, WeCheck, and here comes Victor. All right, so what we're going to be discussing today is one of the topics that seems to pop up in my feed all the time on Facebook. The objectivists trying to say that anarchism is completely lacking objectivism, objective truth, objective values, and that you have to have some sort of constitutionally mandated rights and fundamental rules and so on. And we're going to go ahead and dispel some of these mythologies. So, just so you know, if you do want to participate, we are going to go ahead and keep track of what's going on in the chat room on the YouTubes. So, feel free to leave a comment, and I will see about bringing that comment on board so that we can discuss it. So, the first link that we're going to be looking at is basically it comes from. Let's see, what's the guy's name? Ari something? Ari. What's his name? This came from.
Is that the one from Solo?
Yeah. Mitchell, you brought this one up. Ari something. I don't know his last name.
Ari.
Anyway, he has a section on the ari.anrand.org. /FAQ.
From the FAQ.
Yeah, and it's about what are the views on the libertarian movement. Of course, there's this, well, they stole this idea and then, maligned it and completely screwed it all up and whatever. Or perhaps maybe we actually had a better understanding of the epistemology of the original thought that came to Ayn Rand. Actually, maybe it wasn't an original thought. There might have been people before her who thought about it.
Can I read you this quote by, hold on, let me find it, but there's a great quote by Mises.
Sure, but when you find it, let me know.
Okay, I got it. So, this is Mises responding to the Objectivists who accused Murray Rothbard of plagiarism. I really did not know that the concept that man has no automatic knowledge of how to survive and that the task of his reason is to keep him alive was not known to mankind before the fall of 1957.
Yeah, it's certainly not likely that Ayn Rand was coming up with completely original thoughts. In fact, everything is derivative of the works before us. We all are living on the shoulders of geniuses.
I know, before Ayn Rand, a lot of people thought A was B.
Oh, really? Yeah, A equals B was the norm, certainly. All right, so
Yeah,
actually, let's start with that point. A equals A is one of the Ayn Rand positions.
Well, that's actually Aristotle. She did not originate that.
Yeah, well, a lot of objectivists use that as a standard. Yet, for some reason, because human is human. Apparently, if they're in government, however, human equals angel. It seems like. How do they point out that you can have a government without having people not being people?
I don't really think you understand, to be fair, I don't really think you understand the objectivist criticism, because that's not what objectivist is saying. At least from my understanding of it, what they're saying is that the market is not a moral system. It's just based on supplying mankind with whatever he needs. And ethics is separate from the marketplace, right? Giving someone shoes is different than telling people rules. And that under anarchy, the non-aggression principle, Ayn Rand believed, would be optional. Certain agencies would follow it, certain agencies wouldn't. But if you have a government and a monopoly that says the only laws we're going to prohibit are laws against the violation of individual rights, then it's not optional. Then the non-aggression principle isn't, well, I choose to follow it, I choose not. Where if you have anarchism, then it's up in the air, and there's no guarantee that people will follow it. But if you have a government, they can enforce and make sure that people follow it.
You know, my view on the NAP has always been that it's the kind of the foundation of what ethics is. I definitely think the objectivists have a misconception on it, but at the same time, I don't think the NAP is the end-all solution for everything.
Well, keep in mind the NAP is a derivation of the, you know, it's an epistemology of consistency of A equals A. I am a human, you are a human. If I initiate violence against you, I've indicated that I no longer accept the rights of people to have control over their bodies, self-ownership, and therefore I've authorized everyone else to do the same to me, and this now authorizes somebody to act in self-defense, putting an end to my hostile activities. The use of aggression is certainly something that somebody can decide to do, but it immediately, when it is taken, you know, as an action, creates a response of a truth that is accepted. So anarchists, we understand that, and we accept that, you know, yes, if you initiate violence, let's say you steal someone's property, then you no longer accept property rights. Therefore, anyone can take your property from you. Leads to a solution of, you know, you steal stuff, your stuff's going to get stolen 100%. You lose everything. So there's no benefit to somebody stealing. And then we figure out through the system of science, which is basically trial, you know, you come up with a hypothesis of how to deal with some situation, you test it, and if the hypothesis works, then you go along with it as a theory, and then you move forward. So by having the marketplace test these different methods of dealing with aggressors, you can come up with more objective standards by which the problem is solved, such as merchant law.
Well, another thing I think with the market, with dealing with aggressors than anything, you get much better like rehabilitation type things. I mean, right now, our prison systems today are a joke. They don't rehabilitate people; they just make them into more hard-earned criminals.
Definitely, definitely. All right. Well, let's see what the criticisms are.
Well, Robert, you're not. I mean, are you going to address what I brought up? Because I think that's really,
right,
at least from Ayn Rand's lip, that's her view. I think not that government are angels. She's never said that. I think that's strawmanning the objectivist position.
I think Ayn Rand might be in that same boat as Friedrich Hayek, where that idea of I don't know if any of you have read The Road to Serfdom at all, but like government basically cannot govern beyond what it is capable of. Like what it's capable of doing. Like does that make any sense at all?
All right. Well, the thing that I would suggest is the point I was making is that if you follow Ayn Rand's logic, that A equals A, that if you have humans are humans and therefore they have no rights over another, you know, a person has no right to control or own another human being, then you can't have a government, because a government actually is the essential ownership of other people by a specific group of people. They can dictate to others what they have to do or what they cannot do as rules that they specifically choose. It is not the individual choosing an action and then responding to an action. So, you know, government creates an A equals B situation. They are special people. So that's the reason why I don't understand why, you know, Randians would not approve of anarchy. But the criticism that you're talking about, as far as, you know, if you don't have some sort of objective or final ruling, instead you have subjective value, where you're going to have random groups, you know, choosing or not choosing to accept the the truth of non-aggression, the truth of property ownership, and so on, not respecting these objective principles, is that there's going to be these agencies that will break down and go into thug-type warfare, and you're going to have warlords basically taking over. We've seen Robert Murphy's works on this, where he discusses why warlords wouldn't take over because of the repeat dealings consequence, where you have essentially the tit for tat. It's game theory, where if you have somebody is a bad actor, they act badly, and then you act badly back to them, and eventually they figure out by cooperating, you end up having a more cooperative and more prosperous society as a general rule. But if I'm not understanding you, Daniel, just go ahead and try to clarify that, if you would.
Well, I think, and I recommend, people read The Nature of Government to really get a sense of her criticisms. But I think what Ayn Rand was saying is that, look, in a state, they let you know in advance what the laws are. There's a procedure if you want to change the laws. You don't just decide to say, I'm going to do this. You don't know. And if people are going to be punished for something, they have to know in advance what it is they're going to be punished for, why they're not allowed to do it, go to court, and under anarchy you'd have, Sharia law, you'd have this type of law, you'd have that type of law, and the non-aggression principle is not just based on, I'm going to use violence when I want to use violence. People disagree on what is considered even defense. Even libertarians who are anarchists disagree. Is abortion a violation of the non-aggression principle? Is circumcision? How about intellectual property? So there's always going to be disagreements, and if you get rid of the state, you're going to be surrounded by many statists still with the statist mentality who are going to want to use violence in a manner outside of self-defense. So better, at least according to her point of view. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I think if we're going to attack a point of view, we have to get it. We have to not strawman it first. I think, according to her point of view, that a government has a rules and a procedure in place, and because it's a monopoly, everyone is bound by the same rules. And we want to live in a society where everyone is bound by the same rules, instead of saying, well, I'm going to use violence here and I'm going to use violence here. And so if we live in a place where the majority agrees that the non-aggression principle is valid, the best way to do that is through a monopolization.
Well, just because there's those types of rules and stuff in place, that doesn't guarantee that the system will work. I mean, we see that every day with our own government. I mean, like, we still see laws like the NDAA get passed, which, if you were to put that to, like, an actual, like, democratic vote, like, everyone has a say in everything that happens, a thing like that would not get passed.
Mm-hmm.
Because...
No, I certainly agree. I mean, I think the response that I would have to Ayn Rand is that she believes that the law is static. These are what the laws are, and they're never changing, and that's just bullshit. Government changes laws all the time. So her view of government is not based on how it really works. Yes, I agree with you that she puts government on a very, how she wants it to be, and not based on how it is.
Okay, and when it comes to the idea that there would be subjectivity in some laws, sure, there would be subjectivity in some laws, but of course in Ayn Rand's perfect world there would be subjectivity in some laws as well, because she didn't, as far as I understand it, support a one-world government, and that there would be one ultimate ruler, one single person in charge of making the law. Because if you have more than one person, or more than one country, or more than one province, or more than one city government, every single one of these governments is going to have its own individual rules, and now you're going to have the same type of thing as anarchy. It's just that it's collectives that are anarchistic, that compete with each other and interact with each other in anarchistic ways. So I think that she's putting out there this idea that yes, there's some sort of A equals B type situation when it comes to the people who are the governing body, the governing people. So Victor, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah. Well, basically, just to go a little bit deeper here and to really get to the roots of this problems, we have to go back to two pivotal major philosophers on this specific question. That would be Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. John Locke, of course, he described an anarchist state as a state of nature without government, where people are endowed with inalienable rights, and they recognize that, and that they willingly defer their rights to the government, their rights for protection, because they realize as rational creatures that there would be disagreements and conflicts, and in order to resolve those conflicts, they would have to defer it to an impartial arbiter to settle those type of conflicts that they would have. Not just irrational conflicts, but just misunderstandings or honest disagreements. And that's why governments are instituted among men, to protect these inalienable rights, in which the consent of the governed, that's just the whole point, that they consent to this government exactly for that purpose. Now, this is to say that, for the most part, according to John Locke, are rational human beings. They're not this Randian or objectivist caricature of frothing at the mouth, irrational subjectivists, going up and down and smashing each other over the head as their whim dictates. So this is the whole thing of the consent of government from a Lockean perspective, is that it is consent of the government, and that's where you have the social contract theory. Now, Hobbes, on the other hand, saw human beings as innately depraved. You know, red tooth and claw, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. So, so in order to have a cohesive society, a functioning society, that's his argument for government, which is not necessarily to be. There is no consent of the government. The government, the government itself has a sovereign right to rule over the people, for the point of a utilitarian, cohesive, structured, functioning society, and that's the whole point. Now, the objectivist, or at least Ayn Rand, comes from the John Locke approach. She was trying to be consistent with that. She's arguing for government, but she's coming from the perspective. She was a whole. She endorsed the whole idea of the consent of governed. She says, I even think she says that in that essay that you just cited there, Daniel, the nature of government. She speaks to the consent of the governed, which of course is ludicrous, but that's we can tackle that if we care to. So that's where she comes in with the whole idea of voluntary taxation, of course, right? She's trying to remain consistent with this consent theory, right? But that's the clash. That is the clash where she comes right up ahead, bashing up against everything else that she espouses in her ethic example of non-aggression or of inalienable rights. So that's the contradiction. Now, the objectivists, of course, they argue tooth and nail. They will not tackle this issue head on, the issue of consent. They dodged and skirted at every corner, and going for that whole red tooth and claw and irrational subjectivism, and that people without a monolithic government, that's where you would have dogs chasing cats, and people driving their cars down the wrong side of the lane, and so they look at the state. They look at the state of the nature of the culture and whatever irrational manifestation taking place, whether you have the advocates of Sharia law, or if you have the irrational environmentalists claiming that that you're aggressing against the snail darter and the spotted owl, therefore that's aggression. We have to stop. Just all this irrational subjectivism, and this is what they're claiming would be the inevitable consequence of an anarchist society. So they're coming from the objectivists, the followers of Ayn Rand, coming from Lockean, or excuse me, from a Thomas Hobbes perspective. So they're derailing really from Rand's appreciation. From Rand's fundamental approach is coming from a Lockean tradition.
I mean, I think the major fallacy that statists of all stripes commit is the idea of we can't control what society is going to be like under a state of anarchy, but we can control how government acts. So if we have a government, we can determine that it won't become Sharia law. So then we're safe, but we can't determine it under anarchy. So I would argue that if people are afraid that, well, under anarchy there might be a Sharia law, or you might have people who use violence to arrest people for drugs, my response is, well, how do you know how does imposing a state solve that problem? Because you do have governments that do have Sharia law. You do have governments that do have all these things. And my argument is decentralization. That the argument against a one-world government is that you have nowhere else to go if the government's tyrannical. And I would argue that yes, you may have the people. In fact, I would argue that you probably will have people use violence in ways outside of defense under anarchy. The difference, though, is that group of people don't have the capability to boss 300 million of people around and are not put on a pedestal. So they're very constrained in the amount of people that they get to bully, right? The only reason 535 people get to tell the other 300 million people what to do is because they're viewed as, oh, there's something righteous about the state. There's something that we are compelled to listen to, and people do it. We're under anarchy. Yes, you may still have some violence, but gone is this veil of putting one on the pedestal. That all these DROs are not viewed as just objective people trying to improve the world for the better, but profit maximizing, and therefore they're going to be met with a far greater deal of skepticism than is met when it comes to the state.
Agreed. So, if we look at
was that a little bit too didactic with my talking about Thomas Hobbes and John Locke? There was a little bit too didactic. Do you guys appreciate it? Where I'm
sorry, you're breaking
the point
up.
I was trying to.
Yeah, man, you're kind of breaking up.
You're breaking up, but I got what you're saying there. In the Hobbes and the Lockean concepts of what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
You know, Ayn Rand herself said that you know, governance should be paid for through a voluntary contribution. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's ridiculous about that is if you only have one provider of a service, and it's a necessary service, there's no voluntary thing to it. If you have to have it, and only one person provides it, you have to buy it. You can't voluntarily choose to opt out if it's a necessary service, such as protection, such as arbitration services. Yeah. Okay, there will.
You don't have to buy our food, but we're not going to let anyone else sell you food. Well, then we sort of, yeah.
Right, and so how, you know, what choice is there? There is no choice, and so if you're going to have the option of funding or not funding government, as Ayn Rand herself called for, voluntary payment for government, then you have to have an alternative that someone can choose from, and you know what that's called? It's called polycentric law, which is anarchistic law. And the thing that also is odd about this is that the societies that we've had in the past did use anarchistic law or polycentric law in order to achieve consensus as to what the norms are. Now, of course, there's going to be those fine lines that we have these questionable things that we have disagreements on. But there are some things that are objectively easy, like murder. People understand that murder is wrong. Now, there are some whack jobs in the Sharia law type thing that say that it's not murder if you kill an infidel. Okay, we can at least, as rational objectivists thought, realize that that is mistaken. But as a general rule, there's not that many people who are like that. Okay, and if they want to make their society such that they are going to allow the killing of infidels in their particular area, there's going to be a lot more of us who are going to be willing to use violence to stop that from happening. And so through the process of polycentric law, you come up with common law, which is basically the same thing as you get with, say, language. people in a specific area tend to use the same language, tend to use the same words, and can get their messages across. Nobody dictates to them, this is how the language works. We end up using the same language just as a matter of spontaneous order. Okay? And the thing that's important about objective law is that spontaneous order produces objective law. It creates a system where different competing ideas on how to deal with problems of disagreements are resolved in different methods, and whichever method happens to see market forces bring it to the top as being the most successful and most appropriate solution for whatever the problem is, wins. People buy the products that they like and don't buy the products they don't like. And so as a society, we start to see the ones that are providing the best quality come to the top. Whereas if you have a government dictating, all right, well, this is the way it's going to be, then you have the subjective preferences of those rulers who decide what the laws are.
Yeah, you know,
important.
What was that, Victor?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no. Another important thing to understand about the objectivists is that it's an integrated philosophy. It goes from top to bottom. It just doesn't take politics as a primary. As you know, it takes all the branches of philosophy and tries to make a consistent case, starting with metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, culminating in politics, and of course art, and as the fifth branch in philosophy. So they would argue that from their perspective, the government is just a given. Okay, there it is, unquestioned, it's a given. Now it's just a matter of a proper government serving its proper functions, quote unquote. If we were ever to arrive at a society that would have a rational government, from their standpoint, of course, that we have to have fundamentally a moral revolution. Okay, that it starts with the basic branches in philosophy before we even get to having an objectivist a government. So the question of government is not questioned whatsoever. It's just a matter of what kind of government. So we don't have the atrocities and the messes that was Nazi Germany, Soviet Union, or kings and whatnot. So they're talking about a fundamental change in the cultures of philosophy. Okay, to have an objective philosophy that's predominant. Not that each and every member of a given society has to be a quote-unquote objectivist or well-studied in philosophy, but predominantly from the objectivist standpoint, that the intellectuals who are the transmissioners of ideas, fundamental ideas, that the society's intellectuals would be objectivists, and that this would filter down onto the culture at hand right now. A lot of people just accept their ideas through social osmosis. They don't even know where they get their ideas, but there is a general terrain out there, not in a homogeneous way, but there's a general terrain that can be followed in any given society. So now, but I would argue, though, as a former objectivist, that yeah, I can agree with that. I'm fine with that. I would argue that even before we get to an anarchist state, it would be fundamentally a moral revolution. And you have philosophers like Stefan Molyneux, who is going right to the roots of these problems. He's not just latching on to the fourth branch of philosophy and politics and saying, oh, political activism, now voting. Of course, he's going right down to the roots. He's going to ethics. He wrote a book called Universally Preferable Behavior. He's going right down to the roots of psychology, to child rearing. This is how you build a free society, right? But whereas the objective would say that the government is it's woven in nature, so to speak, would just be a part of this rational society, we as anarchists would argue that no, it would be necessarily excluded. It would become obsolete. It would fade away, and because the objectives are not taking into account that they're trying to put lipstick on the pig. Okay, lipstick is making a rational case for government, and they're trying to say that what the government ought to do, what it should do, is protect individual rights. But they're not taking into account the nature of the beast, which is institutionalized force, that it's necessarily an initiatory force. So that is the error, as I see it, that they're making.
Yeah. Let me also add that in order for objectivism to work, pretty much the majority of the population has to be objective, and that's no requirement for anarchism. I don't believe that the majority of people have to be anarchists in order for anarchism to work. I don't believe that you could take people as they are. They don't have to change. As they are, you could take people, and I think anarchism would work. But not so for an objectivist society, because why does government grow? I mean, Ayn Rand seems to ignore, well, why if government exists to protect individual rights, how come all these governments don't do that? You know, when I was being interviewed by Jan Halfeld, who's an objectivist, I said to him, Jan, there are hundreds of governments that currently exist. I think if we're going to talk about government, we should analyze what government actually does and not how we want it to be. Out of the hundreds of governments that exists, how many of them are limited to protecting individual rights? And he said none. So he admitted himself 0. So if none, then maybe government is not doing this. Maybe it's the rhetoric. The rhetoric is we exist to protect individual rights, but of course that's what they're going to say because they want to get voted into power. You think when tyrants run for office, they're going to say, vote for me and we're going to bomb people? You think when Obama ran for office, he said, vote for me and I'm going to drone bomb weddings? Of course not. Otherwise, he'd never seek political power, right? It's the rhetoric is vote for me and we will make the world a better place. But but that's not what they're producing.
Yeah, the rhetoric is certainly a bit inflated for marketing purposes. The idea that people stop being people when they go into government is, to me, the fundamental flaw in the objectivist criticism of anarchism. I mean, realistically, government.
Robert.
Yeah.
Can we, when you say they're not looking at people are people, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, because I always make the case this comes down to a view of human nature that determines a lot of arguments for or against government.
Well, the thing that I would say is that their belief is that the government can actually act without having individual subjective goals of seeking power, of seeking wealth, of seeking fame for themselves at the expense of others, and that people do these things as a norm. Some people are certainly more likely to do that than others, and those that are the most skilled at it are the ones that achieve political power. You don't become a political powerhouse if you don't actually seek out your own personal fame and your own personal wealth at the expense of others. It's just a simple fact that the people who are successful in that industry are those people who are capable of manipulating the society into buying into their propaganda and not buying into somebody else's. Expanding on some sort of rhetoric that people want to hear, but it's all rhetoric. It's not actual, truth behind what it is that they're trying to do. Those who manipulate are the most successful in the political realm.
Yeah, you could. You could basically say that. Sorry, go.
Well, I was just gonna point out is objectivists want to have a small government that's limited to just the basics, but the problem is government itself is just one big threat. It's one big threat of the initiation of violence. I don't see how you can try and turn that around, especially with a philosophy like objectivism that is built up pretty much about criticizing governments.
I mean, truth be told, if we were to actually look at objectivism as a understanding that, yes, okay, we have to have objective final arbitration. We have to have a final arbiter when it comes to these different things. What they may actually be is anarcho-monarchists, which a lot of people think of that as a contradiction in terms, but essentially it is a system that says, all right, well, we can't have second guessing, we can't have infighting, we can't have all these different opinions as to what it is that the rules should be. We have to have one final arbiter, and that would require a monarch. And certainly, you know, we're probably going to be a lot better off if we had a single monarch person ruling every single thing instead of a democracy, because of what happens with the tragedy of the commons as far as the buying and selling of the power that exists in such an institution. But
well, when you say democracy, do you mean like a democracy where everyone represents themselves, or do you mean like a democracy where we elect people to represent us?
It doesn't matter which one you use. Both of them are going to have the tragedy of the commons effect. Whether you create interest groups that end up pooling their resources in order to have an effect by using representatives, or whether you have just a one person one vote type of democracy type of situation. In both cases, what will occur is you'll get either advertising that will create a mandate by maybe a semi-majority of people that will create a demand for some specific interest at the expense of all the at the expense of the masses, because what you see is you get concentrated benefits and disperse costs when it comes to government. All right, you can tax people 0.01 cent, and now you've got a whole I don't know how many dollars worth of money to work with that you can apply towards whatever it is your particular interest may be. And so democratic or representative republic type legal systems creates an incentive for people to band together, seek their own particular disparate interests, and use the power of the government to take from everyone to provide them with concentrated benefits. Take small amounts from everyone to get concentrated benefits. It's a tragedy of the commons, just like the grassy fields where you're going to have your sheep go out and eat from the unowned land, and if you don't do it, then your neighbor will, and if you don't get your sheep fed before your neighbor, then you might suffer, because everybody's going to try to benefit themselves as much as possible. The same thing is true of government, except that instead of food for sheep, it's power and money that is almost endless. It's certainly not endless, but it seems that way. And the interest that every single person has is to take advantage of it before their competitor does, at their expense.
Yeah, that raises another point. You were talking about people as they are, and sometimes those two views can clash between the Hobbesian approach and John Locke, as I was touching on before. But one thing that can be kind of said that's rather neutral is that we are resource maximizing creatures. The least amount of energy that we can expand towards gaining resources, we're going for it, right? We'll do cross-border shopping. We'll look for free shit at yard sales, and or maybe we can manipulate the language to get people to to do things for us. So we can exert the least amount of effort and maximize our resources. And sometimes it comes in the way of it comes in our voluntary interactions with one another. We try to get the best for ourselves, and that way we can designate that as selfishness or rational self-interest or whatever. But we're resource maximizing creatures, and we like labor-saving devices, so we don't have to expand so much energy towards those things that we want or need. But that's I could say that that's human nature. That's a part of human nature, and that could be very bad or it could be very good. You could be very resourceful. It could be a good thing. But where you have a concentration of power, just like to touch on what you were talking about, Robert, is that once people have this exclusive power, or have absolute power, or a great deal of power, that human nature part of them maximizing resources will come at other people's expenses. So that's where you have people entering, government being people, as you say. Does that make sense?
Well, sure. You know, efficiency is certainly something that human beings try to strive for, as far as, the least amount of effort necessary in order to enjoy the most benefits. And it may be a completely, quote-unquote selfless act that they're trying to achieve, where they're saying, I want to give $50 to this charitable organization in order to feed the homeless. And if their charitable organization that they're giving their money to is feeding 100 homeless people for that $50, versus the other agency that does 60 homeless people for that $50, well, they're going to get the most bang for their buck and do the most efficient thing possible. So it's a general rule that people want to have the least amount of expense for the most possible gain. I think that's actually it's a component of evolution, realistically.
Well, yeah, but that's where the danger comes in with governments, because these government officials, these people in government, are not angels. They will maximize their resources, but at everybody else's expense, because they're insulated from the consequences that all of us have to face. Right. That if we want to gain something, we have to bring something to the table. They don't have to bring anything to the table if they have a monopoly on force.
Right, and that's the reason why the objectivist may actually be a quote-unquote anarchist, anarcho-monarchist, because if there was a monarchy, a worldwide monarchy, a single individual benevolent dictator who ruled over the entire world, this dictator now has, in essence, ownership of everything and wants to profit maximize for himself, but he also takes the losses unto himself when he screws up. So if he, trashes a rainforest in order to gain some sort of marginal benefit for the short term, when it comes to wood production for homes, for example, then he no longer has those rainforests in the future for his future production and has a loss. And so he can see that and become, a positive net producer and actually, say, all right, well, we're going to regrow the forest, we're going to protect the forest, and there's an incentive for him to be doing a good thing as a monarch, as a dictator. But it requires at least some level of intelligence and some level of foresight, instead of just a Kim Jong-un type, oh, I'm just going to gratify my own individual needs right now. I don't really care about my lineage.
Robert, are you familiar with what Socrates' opinion on government was?
No.
He basically wanted to have a council of philosophers.
Oh, the philosopher king thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the problem with the philosopher king situation is that you eventually are going to get bribery.
Yeah, but how would that not happen with a monarchy?
Well, in the case of the monarch has no ability to sell something he doesn't own. Okay, so if he's going to sell something that he owns, he's going to try to get the best possible price for whatever it is that he's selling. So if he's selling his power to one of his constituents, let's say the power to produce, homes, for example, because they need wood to build those homes, the rainforests are going to be cut down. All right, well, then he can actually, objectively look at the reality of it and say, yes, but then my heirs, who are going to be the king or the queen for all time, we've got this divine right of kings, that he will then say, all right, well, if I'm going to have this forest, cut down and no longer available, my great-grandchild is not going to be able to prosper from it. So he has a profit and loss mechanism that actually incentivizes him to do the right thing. Whereas if you have a large, diverse collection of philosopher kings who are all separately involved, they can sell out from underneath the others what it is that they don't really control. Nobody owns anything in that particular case. Especially when it comes to something like the United States government, where you've got all of these guys who are temporarily in office, who have no future interest in the things that they quote unquote own, that can be sold off for immediate gain and profit.
Yeah, they have a window of time to really maximize their own interest.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a lot of people who are calling for, term limits when it comes to governance in the Senate and so on, and that's actually possibly one of the worst things that you could do. But realistically, even the fact that they're going to die at some point and that their heirs will not take their seat makes the whole thing worse off in general. But anyway, I guess let's go ahead and specifically look at a claim that is that there's all these different subjective, different views that would come into the anarchist society. You've got some people who will make a claim that it is a violation of your property rights to pollute, that you will have violation of property rights of the animal if you abuse it, that you will have a violation of property rights for the the young child who is getting circumcised. All of these different weird things that are claims that, well, if you don't if you don't protect them, you're violating the non-aggression principle, for example. All these different viewpoints create a potential for significant disagreements and infighting, and then you've got the warlord fighting type of situation. How is it that a marketplace could potentially deal with these
Have you ever read? Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Have you read the New Libertarian Manifesto by Samuel Lord Konkin at all?
I have not.
In that one, he actually has some chapters that deal with conflict resolution centers, his idea of how a free market could deal with these sorts of disputes. And here, one second. I'm going to go grab the copy I have real quickly.
All right, Daniel?
Go on, Daniel.
Yeah. I don't know if you read the article by one of my favorite economists in the world, Brian Kaplan, called Tough Luck. So let me just read part of it. What if a poor person gets sick, doesn't have insurance, and can't get his friends, family, or charity to pay for a treatment? What if an elderly person gets defrauded out of his entire retirement and the perpetrator vanishes into thin air? What if a child is starving on the street and no one voluntarily feeds him? What if someone just can't find a job? If you're a libertarian, you face what-ifs like this all the time. The point normally is to make you say tough luck and look like a monster. What puzzles me, though, is why libertarians rarely ask analogous questions like, what if Congress passes an unjust law, the President signs it, and the Supreme Court upholds it? What if the government conscripts you to fight an unjust war and you die a horrible death? What if a poor person drinks and gambles away his welfare check? What if the government denies you permission to legally work? What if the President decides your ethnicity is a national security risk and puts you in a concentration camp and the Supreme Court declares this act constitutional? What if a person lives an extremely unhealthy lifestyle, so by the time they're retired, they're in constant pain, no matter how generous their Medicare coverage is? What happens if a president lies to start a war and voters don't particularly care? Once you start the what-if games, it's hard to stop. Name any political system. I can generate endless hypotheticals to aggravate its supporters. The right lesson to draw, every political perspective eventually has to say tough luck when confronted with well-crafted what-ifs. There's nothing uniquely hard-hearted or cruel about libertarianism. Defenders of democracy, nationalism, liberalism, conservatism, the American Constitution, and social democracy all eventually sigh, life is not fair, or, well, what do you want me to do about it? The obvious reply is that some of these hypotheticals are more realistic than others, but that puts the critics of libertarianism on extremely thin ice. None of what-ifs are fanciful. Several of them, lethal conscription, unhealthy lifestyles, denying foreigners the right to work, wars, have happened or continue to happen on a massive scale, in the most democratic nations on earth. In contrast, we've never seen a rich, modern, libertarian society. For all we know, private charity and libertopia will more than suffice to end absolute poverty. Stranger things have happened. Why the double standard? Last paragraph. Why the double standard? The root, I suspect, is status quo bias. Most people tolerate the unpleasant ramifications of the status quo because they're used to them. You might get conscripted and die a horrible death. Oh well, that's life. Most people won't tolerate the unpleasant ramifications of libertarianism because they're used to a world where government says, we'll never let that happen. But what's so great about that assurance when it's bundled with a long list of other evils that governments blithely tolerate or actively commit on a grand scale every day?
I think that's some good points. I think that one of the things that we certainly want to respond to those types of criticisms is the fact that, you know, not only is it morally consistent because we use the rules of consistency, that if you are a violator, if you initiate violence, then violence, you have approved of violence being used against you, thus the non-aggression principle. That if you claim to be a person who has self-ownership, that you must allow for other people's self-ownership. You know, this is a consistent rule that's consistently logical. Then you move into the results, what happens from this type of philosophy, and the fact is that if you're trying to prevent starvation, and you are going to starve if you give your food to another person who is starving, you have not prevented starvation. You have to have surplus in order to prevent starvation for a person starving. In the system that creates the most wealth, the most prosperity, the most surplus that can be given to those people who are in need, is a capitalist system. It is a system where you own the fruits of your labor, that you actually can distribute what it is that you make in excess to those people who you find are worthy of it. But you know, you have to have the stuff in order to give. You can't just give from, you know, the phantom world by printing money out of thin air. You know, it certainly can work for a while, but then it disappears and it all collapses. So that's where we are realists in the idea that we can actually satisfy the needs of these you know, desperate people if we actually have the surplus available to us to do so. But I wanted to get back to Mitchell had the source that he was going to comment from.
I cannot remember what page it is from off the top of my head right now. I'm trying to find it, but Samuel Konkin, he basically presented this idea of conflict resolution centers, where basically you could try and come to a resolution that would benefit both parties in this case, in a case. And here I'm trying to find this. I know it's in here somewhere.
Well, I'm sure that there's a lot of different models that could eventually come to conclusions that would establish norms.
Well, that was another thing that Konkin brought up. It was like that this didn't have to be the one model that there could be. There could be much better models than this, even.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have a market where you've got competing systems where one arbitration system is tried, and then another arbitration system is tried, and another arbitration system is tried, and it turns out that the best thing that we can do is actually having a jury of 5 peers. Maybe that's the most efficient and most effective. Or maybe it's 17 peers, or whatever. We don't know exactly what's going to be the best way of doing these arbitrations. So what I would like to suggest is that in the case of, let's say, for example, the claim of the green person who says, well, you know, the environmentalist, well, you're polluting my air. Yeah, well, I breathed carbon monoxide out, and I did pollute the air because I'm a human being and I breathe. This is the nature of our, you know, cohabitation. If we all live in the same society, you know, my walking over towards where you happen to be standing, and if I'm coming from the direction of the sun, I'm, you know, hurting your sunlight exposure by putting a shadow on top of you. Okay, there are going to be losses that are going to be incurred by other people being around you. It's the nature of the beast. We all interact in some way, shape, or form. I'm denying you of clean air by driving a vehicle. Now, how much is that worth? What is the cost benefit? What is the market for these particular issues. So when it comes to, let's say, a car that is fueled by some sort of nuclear reaction and it puts out radioactive gas, obviously that's a stupid situation. We're going to have a lot of expenses related to that. I'm causing a lot of damage to people. If I'm causing people to have deformed children because of my car operating, they have a very, very large interest in stopping me from doing so. There is a financial cost associated with this. And the same thing is true of, let's say, greenhouse gases. Now, how much of a cost is associated with each different thing is determined by market forces. And when something is of a significant value and significant interest to the people that are out there, if you've got a very large percentage of the population who thinks that it's very important that we protect the environment from, let's say, climate change, for example, then their interests are going to be in buying services when it comes to arbitration that are more focused and more forthright about, pushing for these types of costs being raised for the expulsion of these chemicals, and then other people who live in a different preference, that have a different interest for themselves, when they're going to be choosing their actions, they're going to say, I want to have arbitration that is in favor of allowing more particulates to be released into the atmosphere. These two competing interests, or many competing interests, will all interact in the marketplace, and you will see that there are prices that become associated with this. If you can actually show losses for a property, you have a claim of damages, and thus the cost of damages is applied to the person who is interested in polluting. And then you also have the claim of lost productivity by restricting, the pollutant levels. And these costs compete with each other, and which one becomes more valuable is dependent upon an aggregate of subjective value. Whereas having a dictator from government basically say, all right, well, you can't release more than 2 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Well, maybe that means that you can't have more than 3 children. Who knows? There's this arbitrariness that occurs when you deal with the government, that a person just specifically says, all right, well, you can't pollute beyond this particular amount. This amount is not determined through any sort of objective reality of what it is that the society needs as a whole.
Yeah.
And that's where objectivism fails.
Yeah, that's right. And like Robert and everybody else, when it comes to the objectivists, like any material that you read, especially from Rand, where they just talk about, let's say, one designated area, the free market, I mean, they are bang on right. I mean, excellent ratings. The contributions to free market economics is astounding. So not to bash them too much. So the contributions in that realm are quite amazing, and I would be giving them short shift, and they should be paid attention. Rand's writing should be given attention on, as Rand, the philosopher of the free market, and ethics and epistemology and so forth. But that's the whole thing. Is what you were speaking of there was the division of labor and specialization. This is how what brings about maximization of prosperity and efficiency, when you do have specialization in a division of labor. And that's the thing with the objectivists, is that they recognize that when it comes to anything that the market has to offer, from computers to cars to toothpaste to etc., you name it. But all of it, and that's man, the rational animal. That's man, the rational animal, in action when he is economically free to pursue his rational self-interest. It renounces to the benefits of all in a given society, when the individual is respected, the individual's rights is respected and given free rein. But all of a sudden, though, in the realm of justice provision services, all of a sudden, these same human beings that are producing cars and computers and satellite dishes, all of a sudden become irrational beasts who are going to chew each other's heads off at the first sign of conflict. So it's a very disco ball funhouse mirror shattered glass that they're looking into when it comes to human beings. That's for sure.
Another thing that you'll see that people like Jan Helfeld would do, or actually there was the president of the Objectivist thing, or the Ayn Rand Institute. He was talking on an interview, I think, with Reason, where they was talking about the market for arbitration, and he says you can't do it because what you're dealing with is you're selling the right to initiate violence. And if you have a marketplace for this right to initiate violence, then you're going to get the most violent people winning out. And the thing is just mind-blowing is that no, that's not what you're selling.
Initiating violence.
You're not selling the initiation of violence. You're selling the defense against violence.
Yes, exactly.
You're buying and selling the protection against violence. It is not the initiation of. In fact, if you can imagine, if a market were able to exist in this type of environment, can you imagine the potential for innovation when it comes to how we deal with the aggressor? Let's say that we somehow come up with a button that you can push on your keychain that would immediately cause a bubble of, I don't know, styrofoam to explode in the area, freezing everyone so that nobody can actually act, and then it would send a response team to the situation, and then you would see, all right, well, who's in the wrong, who's in the right, and nobody could actually hurt anybody because this explosion of it froze everything and nobody could do anything. All right, well, it may sound far-fetched, it may sound like complete sci-fi, but you know what? So did the idea of talking on a device that was this big and being able to reach all the way out on the other side of a planet in your pocket. These technologies that we have never seen, we have no idea where what they're going to be, that can only be guessed at, can come to be if we actually have competition in the marketplace for these ideas. If you don't have competition, you have no innovation. There's no incentive for a monopoly to do anything better than good enough for government work.
Yeah, and another thing, like the common objection is that we've been exposed to recently is like all these different DROs. One DRO would be a Sharia law DRO. Another DRO agency would deal with it. Would be an environmentalist DRO, and that would be like that would lead to an apocalyptic hellhole. But what the objectivists are missing on that is like, we're not just talking about get rid of the state and whatever comes willy-nilly from that. No, just the fact that we're talking about DROs is because we realize that there's going to be disagreements and conflicts, and the whole point of the very conception of DROs is to resolve or minimize these conflicts, not to compound them and make them more complicated.
Right.
The very premise of a DRO.
I also think what they're missing when people say, well, under the current system, let's talk about democratic societies for a moment. Fuck Sharia law for a sec. Let's just talk democratic societies. If you want to make something against the law as a voter, drugs, prostitution, whatever, it's very easy. All you have to do is 2 seconds, stroke of the pen, or vote for someone, and the cost of enforcement is socialized to everyone. So everyone is paying to socialize the cost of throwing people in jail for drugs. Both the people who support the war on drugs and the people who don't. But under let's just take the worst of anarchy, where people are willing to enforce any violence, even throwing people in jail for the war on drugs. Well, the people who are going to pay for this, the costs are not going to be divided by 300 million. It's going to be divided only by people who want this to be a crime. And now it's way more expensive to arrest and incarcerate people, and now people might change their views on, do I really support the legalization of drugs? Well, now it's more expensive. I guess not as much as I thought.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Molyneux argument of sending a bill to all those who endorsed the Iraqi war. Send them a bill.
Right. Suddenly, when they receive the bill, they probably says, "Ah, I wish I was in the front line."
Exactly, and
Blessed are the peacemakers.
and I'd like to go into the article that I got from Mitchell here, and let's see, it's from solopassion.com/node/1294. After a few bits about Molyneux, talking about him, they say that if they're loyal to objectivism, they must accept the facts about man's nature have normative consequences. If the distinguishing characteristic of man is his rational faculty, then the social consequences are that man should be left free to exercise his rational judgment in the pursuit of his own happiness. Okay, I'm along with this, fine. This is perfectly acceptable. Yeah, free to exercise, so therefore we need government. Okay, no, wait. All right, let's see what he says. Rights are a moral concept derived from our... Okay, I'm agreeing with that. They're social requirements for our existence. I'll agree with that too. The individual's natural right to life, liberty, and property needs constitutional protection. What? What?
Yeah. See that even that opening paragraph, Robert.
They
That
added the
opening
word
paragraph,
constitutional
Robert, is coming from a Lockean approach.
Okay, so I get the proof, I get the thing. All right, well, human beings are rational, therefore they have the right to be rational, and that means rationally producing, seeking their own self-interest. Okay, this is a requirement for our existence, yeah. Therefore, we need constitutional protection. It's this non sequitur. It's just completely jumping out of the, there is no logical step by which one, can assume that this one, therefore that one. This is a complete jump.
There really isn't a clear line that's drawn between the two.
Yeah. He says, as a result, government and society are subordinated to moral objective law.
Yeah, exactly. This is talk. This is John.
Who says that's true? Why? That's one of the problems that I have with Ayn Rand. That she was against anarchy because violence would be used in a subjective manner. Who says government law is objective? Is North Korea's law objective? Is Iran? Is Iraq? Is Switzerland? Is the United States? Why, if you have a government, it's going to be a protector? This is a thesis devoid of any proof whatsoever.
Yeah, there's no proof steps there. There is absolutely no steps in the proof or logic that go from let's do this, and then profit.
Right. Don't tell me that we need government to protect us. Show me government that protects us first. And if it doesn't, I'm more in the rational when I say government is violence. Based on what? The fucking evidence. What are you basing government as a protector on? So pie in the sky, the nirvana fallacy. What I want government to be is what government is. No, yeah, government is what it is.
Yeah, it's putting lipstick on the pig. They're completely ignoring.
Well,
they're ignoring the historical and factual ethical nature of government.
Yes.
Government was established by conquer and divide. It's initiatory violence incarnate.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to put this lipstick, this constitutional lipstick, smeared all over the pig, and call it a protector.
I think what a lot of people do is they say we have this thing called the state. Now let me try to justify its existence. But why? I mean, I understand the government's here, and no one wants to feel like they're oppressed, and no one wants to feel like government's evil because that's depressing. But so what? Sometimes reality fucking sucks. Okay? And you just have to learn to deal with it. I don't go around saying, man, I'm a chick magnet. Women, they faint every time they see me. I mean, maybe they faint when they see me, but it's kind of because they're sexually attracted to me. You have to base stuff off reality. You can't just say, I'm a chick magnet because I want to be. I'm really rich because I want to be. yeah, I think we have to judge the state based on how it acts, not how we would like it to act.
You know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we can very clearly see that the answer to the objectivist question is not a government, because it doesn't do what it is that they claim that it does. It never has, and quite frankly, it never can, because of the problem of the tragedy of the commons. If you're going to have any sort of democracy or a republic or representative republic, constitutional republic, all of that is going to fall under the tragedy of the commons, where you've got dispersed costs and concentrated benefits that are available. If you have a monarch that rules the world, potentially you could have a dictator who is a benevolent dictator, and yes, maybe you could have a perfectly good objectivist society. But it's going to take
certainly not a democratic one. And you also have the problem of rational ignorance, right? Because if I buy a car and I don't know anything about cars, and I just pick a car at random, I alone suffer if I have a shitty car. So in the future, I have an incentive to become knowledgeable. But under a government, my vote is worth the same, and I have an equal chance of affecting an outcome whether I obtain knowledge or whether I don't. And I'm drowned out by the ignorant masses. So I'm not rewarded for obtaining knowledge.
And so
whether I vote on, whether I study the candidates or whether I don't, my thing is the same. People always say, well, governments are constrained in doing what they do because if people don't like what they do, they can vote them out of power. Most people don't even know who the congressman is. Do you really think that the average person knows who is in government is responsible for what?
No, they certainly don't. And this is actually an explanation as to why it is that if you had a benevolent dictator, yes, they could actually do stuff like this correctly, theoretically, because they themselves own everything. They own everything, and they themselves will experience the loss if they screw up, and they have an incentive of doing it right.
But it comes to a matter of property rights and properly acquired property, though. How did this person come to own everything? What did they do?
Person come to own everything? Let's say it's Jesus Christ, resurrected, and now he has the ability to.
I'm not Christian. I wouldn't give Jesus my stuff.
Well, you know what? He can take it from you at his will, and you can't kill him. So too damn bad. Whatever it may be. If you had a benevolent dictator, you might be able to have the objectivist reality of it'd actually have to be a divine being who is capable of making decisions across the entire planet. Otherwise, you have subjective governance. It's all going to be subjective.
And that's another point too, is that there's always been attempts in history to get to justify this Leviathan, and of course there are mystical, irrational justifications, such as the divine right of kings, or the Plato's philosopher kings, who just happen to be very smart, intelligent people. By the grace of their intelligence, they should rule over everybody else. The objectivists, though, they don't seek out a justification of government. They just go for the consent of the government, and they just take it as if it was a given. It's just a given. It's beyond question.
I mean, the existence of even one anarchist is proof that government doesn't exist on consent, right?
Yeah.
So
pretty much.
I remember, my mother said to me once, government has consent of the governed, and I said, well, doesn't my explicit dissent override any implied consent? Otherwise, if not, I can just go to a woman and I say, you want to have sex? And she says no, and I say, well, you say no, but really you mean yes.
Yeah.
It's not.
We can always count on Daniel for herself.
I really need to try to, Roth, you're going to have to stop using I'm just going to go ahead and have sex with this woman as being one of your arguments against whatever it happens to be. The second time you've done that.
Me?
Yes.
Because it's a powerful analogy that works.
Yeah, it pushes buttons. Good job. All right.
For self-deprecating humor, we can always count on you.
Yeah.
As someone said to me yesterday, your humor is very self-defecating.
Yeah, well, it is. All right, so they continue. Let's see. Now, if the so-called objectivists are loyal to anarchy, they'd have to evade the knowledge they've already sworn allegiance to, as discussed above. Anarchists, on the other hand, believe that there should be a market in the use of force without a final arbiter to rectify disputes. No, we don't. There could be a final arbiter, absolutely, in rectifying disputes. The arbiter that's agreed to by both of the disputants. That's the final arbiter. and it happens to be the final arbiter in this case for this person, and this case for that person, and we don't have some sort of exception where the arbiter can't have somebody else above them. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, you've got your president of the United States of America, and he goes off and has a sexual encounter with a woman, and she claims that it is not consensual. Or maybe the justices of the Supreme Court, they have some sort of encounter with another group, and they are there are claimants that say, well, they stole our stuff. Maybe the Supreme Court group, as a group, did steal their stuff. Who's going to rule over them? Who's their final arbiter? The answer is already clear, that you never have a single final arbiter about everything, because the arbiter might be in a conflict. So you have to have different arbiters based upon different contracts, different agreements. See how that works? All right, let's see. What else here?
You don't want to give the name of the person who wrote this article.
Wayne Simmons. This is written by Wayne Simmons, yeah. All right, and so he says, justice would be impossible when you can opt out of any judicial decision. Oh. Justice is impossible if you can opt out of any judicial decision. Okay, let's just double check as to how it is possible when you can opt out of it. I don't know, maybe somebody with a gun might tell you, well, if you continue to opt out, we're going to shoot you. You know, if there becomes a situation where a person has, let's say, for example, been convicted and found guilty of having abducted children and killed them, and he claims that, well, I'm just not going to listen to you, somebody's going to put a freaking bullet in his head. It's just the way it's going to happen. If he continues to refuse to accept any sort of agreement as to how things are going to be on. In fact, in a free market society, what will happen is that the person who is the crime committer will have the incentive to solve the crime. In other words, to come up with a way of compensating the victims. If, for example, somebody breaks into a bank and steals $100,000, okay, then it's proven that this particular person has stolen this money, right?
It's on camera.
This has basically said to every single person out in the society, I have implicitly stated I do not accept property ownership, which means that every single person in this community is certainly within their rights to take anything that this guy has, all of his property, for here on out until infinity. He's implicitly consented to it because of his actions. Consistency between his actions and what his truth is. By stealing money, he has indicated, I do not accept property ownership. Therefore, he can't own property and has no claim against anyone else who steals his property. So every single person in this community can now go to this guy, take his stuff, and he'll be broke forever. Now, if he can go to the bank and get some sort of retroactive consent, basically a loan agreement that says, all right, if you guys will get, say that my theft was actually a loan, I will pay you $200,000 over the course of the next 20 years. Now he's made a agreement that indicates he does accept property ownership, and therefore nobody has the right to steal his property anymore. He has found the solution for his own crime. And if he doesn't find a solution for it, basically everyone in the society, whoever they might want to be, is given free rein to screw him over. Now, this may sound harsh, but what happens in the course of a system actually working within consistency, a spontaneous order will result, and repeat dealings and negotiations will occur. And then you'll have multiple agencies trying to negotiate these different encounters, and you'll come up with norms. Just like when you had the merchants who would go out and they would get stuck in the ocean somewhere, they'd hit a coral reef, their ship would be wrecked, and then somebody comes along and finds the shipwreck. Wow, it's all mine. I'm going to go ahead and take all this stuff. Well, why is it that after a period of time, the marketplace actually had, if you found there was a shipwreck, 50% was yours and 50% went to the original owner of the property? How did that occur? Because of repeat dealings. Because when people went out there and took 100% and just kept it for themselves, people heard about it and then started to deny them entry into their ports, or when they found their cargo, would take 100% of it. The tit-for-tat type of negotiation that occurs over time creates norms by which people expect results to occur. So it's not just some sort of, you know, if I don't accept it, well, I'm just going to go get away with it. No, you're going to get screwed over. People will fuck you up. Anyway, what do you guys think about the idea that if you dispute, you know, if you don't agree with the ruling, nothing's going to happen to you?
Well, you know, it's interesting because Ayn Rand, in The Nature of Government, talks about the founding of this country, but, you know, Thomas Jefferson never wanted to have a final arbitrator. When the Supreme Court in Mayberry versus Madison made themselves the final arbitrator, he said that this would turn the government into an oligarchy and was against it. So the very Constitution that Ayn Rand admires, the very founding, how this country was started, that Ayn Rand loves so much, was meant to never have a final arbitrator itself.
That's great. Love it. Victor, anything?
To what specific question? Sorry,
In an anarchist society, what happens if the person ignores the arbitration that has found him guilty?
Yeah, well, see, that's the whole thing, though. Like this person would have to be a severely brain-damaged, evil person, you know, because for the most part, we want to get along with our fellow creatures. We want to not only survive, we want to thrive. Your average person, you know, notwithstanding like all the other questions that can impede upon a human being, like brain damage or somebody who's just wretchedly evil, given their upbringing or whatnot. Most people want to resolve conflict. They don't want to bring it to violence, and they don't want to live out, and they don't want to be ostracized. The ghastly consequences of not getting along with our fellow creatures, you know, and to be cast out into the woods where you're wiping your ass with leaves and chewing down on what is it, squirrels or whatever. That's the type of thing that people don't want to have to face. So if that person originally agreed to leave any possible conflict or disagreement to a third-party arbiter such as a DRO, that's proof of their rationality right there in the case of conflict. Why did they partake in the DRO process in the first place then?
Right.
I think another thing to add is, because I didn't really answer your question, what would happen if you agreed not to be bound by the decision, is that people, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Exactly.
Fine, you're not willing to take your punishment, then when people screw you over,
they're not bound by the...
Fine. You didn't go by the ruling, we're not going to defend you, vice versa.
Well, you see, this is the premise that's given to anarchism, is that only with the state that people you know, that people are complying for the most part with any given laws, because they don't want to face the unpleasant consequences of breaking those laws. This is not to say that an anarchist society is without consequences.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I would respond to the status there is, sorry for so many interruptions, but what I would respond to the status there is, well, if we need government to ensure that people follow the government's laws, what ensures that the government follows their own laws? What ensures that the president follows the Constitution? What ensures that the Supreme Court does their job? What ensures that there's a true separation of powers?
Who watches those watchmen?
Yeah, right.
Exactly. And the thing that is critical about this is that it's not just ostracism that you can't, you know, I'm not going to let you come into my property. It's ostracism from the arbitration system. You didn't want to participate in arbitration and you didn't want to accept the consequences of arbitration. Therefore, when somebody does something to screw you over, just like Daniel said, arbitration is no longer available to you because you did not accept the terms of arbitration.
And there's no initiation of violence. There's no violations of the NAP on that.
Yeah, and everybody else who decides to, if you stole property, now they steal your property, what are you going to do? You're going to go back there and steal it again? They might shoot you. Or, you're going to have the pressure of your own needs upon you that require you to accept the arbitration.
Yeah.
All right, so then this guy says, all this different justices and so on, and they say in the marketplace, one way around this is that anarcho-capitalists, supposing they believe in natural rights, could have their protection agencies force other non-liberty-friendly protection agencies out of the business. This is, of course, a contradiction because they would then be acting like a de facto government. No. They'd be acting as a de facto resolution of arbitration system.
Again, this is a confusion of defensive force versus the initiation of force. We are not pacifists. You can be a pacifist and be a libertarian. I personally am not a pacifist. I think that pacifism is immoral and just says to violent people, you'll win every time. But it's confusing pacifism. I'm not against using force for defense purposes. If someone's coming at me with a knife, I have no problem stabbing him through the heart and killing him, but not because he's not listening to what I say, but because he's threatening me. If he would have behaved, he would have been safe. And it's not because he's not, acting according to my worldview. It's, why should I sacrifice my life for some guy coming at me with a knife? So yes, if these DROs force aggressive people to not be aggressive, yeah, that's not acting like a state. That's simply engaging in defense.
There's some subjectivism for you. You're prizing your life over that of against a violent aggressor.
Yes, I am. Yes, I care more about my life than someone coming at me, stabbing me with a knife. Yes, I do. I'm sorry, I'm a selfish prick that way.
So the bottom line is that it is, yes, we are advocating a de facto, not government, but a de facto system of arbitration. A system of dealing with problem people who actually do stuff that is not acceptable. If you violate my property rights, then I'm going to take action. You're going to have a result, and these things will create rules and norms, just like merchant law did. Okay, so yes, we are creating de facto rules, but not rulers. And if you would like to change the rules because of innovations in technology, lo and behold, you can. So this idea that it is a de facto government is wrong. It's a de facto, quote, governance, if you want to call it that, but it's not really governance. It's rules of interaction, how things get done, and rules evolve over time.
Yeah, the objectivists need to heed Ayn Rand's words about that the definitions are the guardians of rationality. So let's really find out what a definition of government is, and then stop conflating it with a DRO.
Yeah. All right, and as far as this, again, this becomes that, he jumps to the next idea that, well, this enters social chaos and civil war. No, this enters in repeat dealings where warfare is a very difficult and expensive thing. Cooperation and mutually beneficial arrangements where some people will have their needs satisfied in their own particular communities, and others will have different communities, and each group will migrate to where they find the most effective satisfaction of their particular interests. But unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the show. I did want to say Mike Blessing wanted to comment saying, didn't Hans Hermann Hoppe use the benevolent dictator bit? And I believe he did, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Guys?
That I don't know.
No, I don't know. I believe so.
No Hoppe fans here?
No,
right.
I find him an elitist snob.
Yeah. All right. So the claim that he's saying it's an either-or. Objectivist anarchists cannot exist. They either remain loyal to their objectivist premises or they don't. The claim that you can support both is a contradiction. And the fact is, either you're an objectivist or you aren't. And if you're an objectivist, you must be objectively true to A equals A, in that a person who is a governor, a ruler, is no longer the same type of person as a person who is their subject, and they're no longer bound by the same rules. So government, rulers, breaks the objectivist principles, and you cannot be an objectivist without being an anarchist. They are the same. That's the anarchist experience. Thank you again to all of my guests. Appreciate all of your input. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.